We were born in the early 40s, and that was in the days when people with Down syndrome were called mongoloids. My mother just said that all the doctor said to them was he will not be going to school with his sister.
He turned our family upside down when he was born. I was 7 years old when he was born. Back in the early 60s, doctors were not really familiar with Downs. It was like, there's something off here. It took him quite a while for him to begin to develop the signs to look for. The scientific testing wasn't there.
We had no idea that there was any developmental disabilities or anything, but the teacher called. I went over and picked him up. It was like they had, he wasn't able to go into their special education classes.
The choices at that time were either keep your child at home or put them in an institution. And that was often the recommendation. And Fairview, the state institution, was in Salem. And so there was a lot of, I wouldn't say pressure, but a lot of suggestions that perhaps families should put their child there.
Society just didn't have the programs available that we now have.
I just know that Mom and Dad were doing research, and they were looking all over and finding nothing. And they had a high priority of keeping Doug in the family. They did not want to send him somewhere out of state, institutionalize him. That was just not an option. He would have stayed home rather than do that.
We talked to Garton into school, and then that's where he first started, and that's when we met Sally. She was our cheerleader, and she directed and helped us get started with the school. And I don't remember how long it took for the 17 parents to form this cohesive group and decide we wanted to start our own school. We just wanted our kids to have a chance to be able to do what they wanted to do.
When my parents found out about the organization, or the group of parents, they weren't organized and incorporated, I don't think, at that time. They were meeting in a church in South Salem.
But then at some point, there was enough money that we decided to buy this acreage out there on Joseph Street. It was just trial and error, and it was somebody's idea, and we knew what we wanted for our kids, and there was nothing like it. There was only Fairview and Garton, so we just took the road to build the vision that we had for the kids in the future of Shangri-La.
In the beginning, they had the farmhouse, then expanded to the barn for some of the work area. They went to having some people stay there. They eventually built the school, the first part of the school. That building out there was built in 3 parts. The original building and then 2 wings of the newer building that was out there.
Some of us knew how to run the sewing machine, but we made drapes and, because we didn't have a lot of money. And then that's when we held the baked goods sales and anything to raise money.
My dad had contributed a lot in the beginning of the school, helping to remodel and build. He helped with the garden. He took some of our playground equipment that we had outgrown. I always wondered what happened to our big swing, and then I found out that it ended up at Shangri-La.
Shangri-La was like an alternative possibility coming into existence. And I can imagine that Shangri-La must have had some kind of a waiting list, to be able to get in back in those days, because the family style, it was just so far above and beyond in terms of its care for the clients and what Fairview was.
Everybody was so cooperative and giving and wanted only to help each other, and they were all great families. And we, out of that, we did have some special friendships that lasted, even down the years.
My parents were thrilled to do anything they could, and all the other parents were too. And my mother had lifelong friends then, from Eugene to Portland, and that was the wonderful thing.
Do you remember how old you were when you went to Shangri-La for the first time?
I was probably about 6 when I went there.
There's a story in one of the newsletters that Sally wrote about a young man who came out to visit. He had never been away from his parents, and he stayed for the day and got along just fine. And my mother noted this young man was Larry that she was talking about. So that's how it all started, and he loved it. He loved, because I had gone to school and he was never able. There was no special education in those days. And so he loved the fact that he was going to school.
When Doug was going to be brought into Shangri-La, there was a 6-week blackout period that there was no contact with family. I had chicken pox. The day that they took him away, I was 11 years old. I had chicken pox, and I remember laying across my bed crying my eyes out that they just took my brother away, because we slept in the same bed. We were just a 2-bedroom house, so we were very, very close. It was very difficult for me the day that they took him away.
There was a school bus that would pick her up, and there was another, I guess, girl at that point that lived in our neighborhood, and so they would pick the 2 of them up, take them to Shangri-La, and then bring them home every afternoon. So it's just like, getting on a regular school bus.
The school, which is on the other end of the property, had students that were bussed out from Salem every day. So those were the day students, if you will. And then you had the live-in students, called the weekenders, that were there living on the campus, on the property, year-round.
I remember seeing a letter from my mom to like her parents saying, I don't know how we're going to afford it. It's $50 a month. $50 a month? You're kidding. But I mean, the campus itself was beautiful. I loved going out there as a kid and visiting her campus and seeing the classrooms. I mean, it was kind of like a small private school.
The schoolhouse was like 2 big rooms, as I recall. There might have been a couple of other side rooms and bathrooms. It was pretty low key, small tables, age appropriate size for things.
So yeah, it was trial and error in the good old days. We didn't have a lot of technology.
They had teachers there that worked with them every day. They learned sign language, because Doug could sign. He learned to read and write, and eventually he was able to read. He was able to read his King James English Bible.
Some of the older people, they were teaching them to do some of the prep in the kitchen. They were teaching them skills in terms of custodial skills, so they could maybe go out into the community and help in some way. They were working in the garden. There's plenty of little notes in the newsletter about who helped wash the windows that day. It was almost like every weekend before they left, they were doing some kind of cleanup.
Well, some of us were working with weeds and grass.
My brother did not like getting dirty. So the fact that there's a picture somewhere of him hoeing in the garden, that was good.
I used to make rugs there.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
What kind?
Well,
Was it with rags? Or was it with...
Remember, I used to knit all the time for rugs, and it was for the floor, like kitchen or something.
It developed then over time where another dormitory was built on site. They were able to up the amount of clients that they had in care, and in a second dormitory, then a third dormitory. They were built over time.
Like Fur Cottage had 10 men over here and 10 women over here. And then there were people that stayed there all the time and staff that came in during the day.
With that, then your family probably becomes the folks that live in your dormitory. And then you go to school with the rest of them during the daytime. And so their world began to expand over time. And their acquaintances and their friendships began to expand, and the family began to expand.
He got to go to the dances, he played softball, helped with chores around the cottage or the school or whatever. He had friends.
From the time that Doug was probably about 7 years old, I have a picture of him at Busch Stadium at Willamette Park in Salem. The Special Olympics were held there every year. and he would participate.
You know, a lot of families would go, and we would go as, you know, the cheerleaders or the huggers at the end. You know, so they would do the 100-yard dash, and, you know, our job was to hug, you know, everyone who came through. So I was going quickly through some photo albums when I was out in Oregon and found pictures of Special Olympics, but then I also found pictures of her playing basketball, and I'm like, what the heck? I didn't remember that. You know, but yeah, they must have found some way to connect, you know, different kids together and have these basketball games.
One of the first things Larry participated in was bowling, and there were 4 mothers who saw to it that their 4 sons were on a bowling team, the Shangri-La Bowlers, and they went to Special Olympics. I want to say they bowled every week or every other week or something, but it was such friendships. It was so important, and it was a great gift to all of them.
Doug was qualified to participate in the Pacific Rim Regional Special Olympics. It was held in South Korea, and there were people from China and Japan and South Korea and the United States. He tied for the gold medal. It was the elements of golf. It was not like golfing 9 holes, but rather it was driving, pitching, and putting. He won the gold medal in South Korea.
Larry and I always watched Sky King on Saturday mornings. It was a kids show. The guy was a pilot and a crime fighter. It was in 1964, and I was working at the time, and I heard that Sky King was going to be at the Oregon State Fair. So I wrote a letter to him at the Oregon State Fair, wondering if he would be able to go out to Shangri-La to visit the school and meet some of the people there. So I happened to be at my folks one day during State Fair, and the phone rang, and my dad answered it, and he said, "Judy, there's somebody on the phone by the name of Kirby Grant. He says he's Sky King and he wants to talk to you." I talked to him, and he, yes, very much wanted to go to Shangri-La, and he signed autographs, and people were quite thrilled that he was there. Every day she would go take Larry out there, and she would cook for 100 people, make lunch for everyone, and then be home by about 3 or so with Larry, and then take care of her acre that she lived on.
I was always aware, very much aware of the effort that my parents were putting into it. They were involved with Shangri-La. My dad ran a business here in Yamhill County. He was at board meetings, seemed like every week. I'm sure it wasn't. He served on the board for a while, and then he became chairman of the board for over 30 years. But I'm really proud of what Mom and Dad did with their lives, and the way that Dad served the various boards that he was on.
I think my dad served on the board, you know, fairly regularly, but I always got the feeling that they let it run the way that Shangri-La wanted, you know, that the people who were running it, the organization, wanted it to run.
Is it a little different than you remember?
Yes, way different.
Was that front door the same?
No,
Nope, nothing's the same.
no. It used to be white.
It used to be white.
Yeah. When we went to school, it was white.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, and this picture was taken, well, we started it in 1963. Was when we bought the land. It's unbelievable.
And it went all the way from here over down past that red barn, quite a little ways past that, and there was an old white farmhouse along with a white barn that was shaped a lot like that red barn, and that was the original residential facility.
My mother was Florence Hall.
Oh my gosh, she was a good friend of mine.
Yes.
And Larry, this is Craig.
Yeah.
I brought Larry with me today.
Oh, did you?
I brought one of his pictures.
Oh,
Yeah, this is Larry.
oh, Larry. Oh, oh, yes, I remember him.
So,
In the end, I can't say enough in accolades for Shangri-La of what it was able to do for Doug in Doug's life, because he spent over 50 years in the Shangri-La system, moving from the campus where the school is located when he became an adult, going into group home and multi-group settings, and then eventually to the group home that he lived in when he passed away. And it was family all the way through.
Dennis, do you remember where he was in here?
I think he was in this room.
On that correct.
He was always a sports fan of some kind, so he always had some kind of a sports quilt, some team that he was supporting at the time that was on his bed. And
Oh my God.
This would have been Larry's room, right here. Larry's bed would have been right here, going this way. And I probably have a few photos somewhere. Him sitting on his bed with his Tennessee Ernie Ford tapes. Shangri-La just gave him opportunities to learn skills, opportunities to meet new people, opportunities to learn to follow directions more, opportunities to be away from his family that he had never been away from before, and the friendships that were his alone. That's the thing. It's like, well, he knew all my friends, he knew all my dad's friends and my mom's friends, but the friends that he made at Shangri-La were his alone.
I always felt that Kelly was really, really well cared for. I felt like the people really cared about what they were doing, and that was kind of from the top down. And you can't put a price on that level of care.
I think for Craig, we've tried to give him just a normal life. It was because of Shangri-La and the people that we met and changes within, society, and that he's had a good life.
It was such a wonderful thing too for the parents, because a lot of these parents didn't know that there was another family that existed with a child with a developmental disabilities. They were often pretty isolated themselves, so the camaraderie that developed among the parents was wonderful.
I can't even imagine that, it started as that small little, group of families like, hey, let's try this out, and to see where it's, ended up, I'm just amazed, and in a very, very good way.
This transition in the 20th century to valuing the contribution of the developmentally disabled community, Shangri-La was in the middle of that, right in the middle of that, and I feel like on the forefront.
It was just astounding what it was. Such a dedicated staff. They all had a servant's heart. I don't know of anyone who worked there that was just there for the job. They were there to really help people and enrich lives.